my story with history starts when I was just about 6 years old.
In your latest book, which is Hidden Links, tell us about it.
So in my book, Hidden Links, which I have co-authored along with my father, we have presented multiple little anecdotes which we have connected to show and showcase the bigger picture, right? We feel that a lot of the happenings today are influenced by another period in time, which we term as the Fountainhead Epoch, the period from 300 to 600 BCE. This is the most crazy fact I've ever discovered, right? Climate change is not a modern happening, but has rather been happening throughout history, and it is climate change that is a very factor for the fall of some of the greatest civilizations towards the beginning of time. So Alexander the Great was a Greek conqueror who, by the time at the age of 32, he conquered the entire known world, right? But unfortunately, that's the same year when he died, the young age of 32. Right? What if in a parallel universe he had not died? Right? History as a subject, which has completely taken me over. It's not me, but the subject who is speaking.
Hi and welcome to BreakFree India podcast with me, Jane, and this is Zac Sangeet, the youngest guest on my show thus far, and he is only 13 today, but he's been writing for a while. He is one of the world's youngest historians. He is the author of the series, which is called World History in 3 Points, and More World History in 3 Points, which came out as the sequel to the first one, now translated into more than 10 languages, and he also has another book, which is called Hidden Links, that came out in 2024, that's this year, by Penguin, published by Penguin. As a public speaker, he has spoken at the Global Shapers, the World Economic Forum, and at the Abdul Kalam keynote lecture as well. The youngest global fellow when it comes to Kechtel, is that how you pronounce it? Okay, India Reading Olympiad winner, SEM Youth Fellow, has been on multiple shows and podcasts as well. So thanks so much for joining us, Zac. Good day. Welcome to my show.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here today.
All right. So you're just 13. How does it feel to be doing so much at just 13? Like, I do not honestly remember what I was doing at 13. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about that?
I just enjoy what I'm doing, and it's always a pleasure to have such access to various things across this beautiful subject. So.
That's wonderful. I mean, at just 12, how have you managed to become one of the world's youngest historians? What did you break free from? Because this is the BreakFree podcast and so many people are watching it, listening to it. How did you break free from being a regular child to being this prodigy?
So my story with history starts when I was just about 6 years old. My parents had come back from a trip to Paris, and my mother always had the habit of showing me the pictures of her trip. Now, one of the pictures that she showed me was that of the Mona Lisa. And when she showed me this, I was very intrigued by what exactly and why exactly was this painting so famous, right? There were so many people just glancing and watching this small little painting. So when I asked my mother why exactly this painting is so famous and why it's so important, she told me multiple stories and anecdotes about this painting. She even told me to do a little bit of my own research about it, right? And when I started studying about this painting and researching about this painting, I realized that to understand why exactly it's such a prized jewel, I need to not only understand the painting, but also some of the surrounding peripheral factors, right? Including its artist, Leonardo da Vinci, the period in which it was painted, the Renaissance, and some other Renaissance artists. And it was during this time when I started studying various parts of history or various parts surrounding the Mona Lisa that I started getting interested in history as a subject, as a whole.
I love that. I mean, I remember my history teacher was one of the best teachers I've had. It's one of the reasons that I am also intrigued by history in general. Of course, I have not deep dived into so many historical incidents, but I love that it all started with the Mona Lisa for you. Did the little smile, or is that a smile, also intrigue you?
Definitely, that was one of the first things that caught my mind and intrigued me about the painting, right?
That's wonderful. Now, how did you come up with this idea of connecting seemingly random events from across different time periods in your latest book, which is Hidden Links? Tell us about it. This is the book, right?
Yes. So, in my book, Hidden Links, which I have co-authored along with my father, I have we have presented multiple little anecdotes which we have connected to show and showcase the bigger picture, right? So, in my first two books, I had a sort of research method in which I would go through the topic in which I was learning, right? And I would sort of start to distill it and look at it from the perspective of 3 points, right? Now, when I was doing this in the evenings, my parents would call me out for a walk, and it was during this time that I would narrate my learnings in the topics I was studying to my father. Now, looking at it from a traditional historical perspective, I was always looking at these various topics in silos, right? Each topic is happening individually in, say, various periods of time. But my father, being a strategy consultant, he wasn't looking at these events in silos. He was trying to connect the dots. He was trying to see how exactly, say, a Silk Road could connect to a small migration, could connect to a petty squabble, and could connect to some of the largest empires or powerhouses of the time. And so slowly, when I was narrating to him the various topics I was learning, he would try to develop the connections with me, right? The way we worked about it were like as if we were detectives of history, right? We would try to find connections, and if we couldn't, we would quickly abandon them and move on. And slowly, like that, we were able to discover multiple great threads, including some of the ones presented in this book. Some are on climate changes, some are even on how women empowerment has been sparked throughout the years.
I love it. I mean, it's interesting that you became like Sherlock Holmes and Watson, yeah? But in history, is there one particular period of time in history where you found a lot of correlations that you really thought was great in the book?
The relations are not really limited to a period of time, is what our understanding has been. We've been able to, so everything, as silly as it might seem, doesn't start or end in that specific era. It is extending throughout periods of time. But we feel that a lot of the happenings today are influenced by another period in time, which we term as the Fountainhead Epoch. The period from 300 to 600 BCE. This was a period in which it was a period of churn, and all our modern philosophies, our economics, political sciences, even our understanding of history has derived from this specific point in time. And that's influenced our entire modern society and civilization.
300 to 600 BC.
Yes.
Wow. Where do you even go and research from this time? Like, if you had to go back and see what happened then, where are the sources?
So for this specific book, Hidden Links, we had to deal with a very different type of sources, right? So in the first two books, World History in 3 Points and More World History in 3 Points, I dealt with sources such as, say, books or from the internet, etc. Right? The problem with these sources is that they all operate in silos, like I said. They all occur along and just show us the history of specific events. And we needed the connections. So we also utilized things such as, say, genetic studies or research papers from universities. We went through multiple small university research papers, and we ended up connecting that to the traditional historical sources.
I love it. I mean, there's a lot of research that you have done. And this is apart from going to school and studying and doing your regular work and, like everything that you do at school. Very cool. Tell us, what was the inspiration behind creating your first 2 history books, which is 3 points per topic? I mean, you just took 3 points. Like, where did that idea come from?
So I started my research in history as a 6-year-old, as I said. And during this time, I would go through each and every topic which I'm learning. And I came across a common problem, a problem which I feel everyone in the world who is interested in history faces. History is too verbose as a subject. It's too long-winded. It looks at things through the worm's eye view, right? I would want to, as a reader of history, one would want to understand the key points, the small things, but history would take you through the periphery. It would show you the surroundings, right? In this modern era, that is not what we need, what we want, right? We have very short attention spans. We are very busy, right? Probably owing a lot to social media. So I also faced the same problem. And when I started writing about history, I noticed that it was very difficult for me to write. I can't do it with all this data, with all this random bunch of things being compiled together. And so I sort of, amidst my research, discovered a way in which I can write. The same way used by storytellers, right? A situation, a complication, and a solution should be found. Take, for example, Genghis Khan, one of the greatest conquerors our world has known, right? If I'm writing about him, the situation would speak about what exactly is going on during his time. In the case of Genghis Khan, he was a young boy who is in the steppe plains. His father is a tribal chieftain. And after his father's death, he hopes to be the successor of his father's small tribe. The complication is sort of the plot twist, the problem that sparks, right? It's, in the case of Genghis Khan, it would be the fact that he was thrown out of his tribe after his father's death. And it was not him, but his cousin who took over the tribe. Now, my most favorite part of the 3 points is the solution or the resolution. It's the meaty part where I try to compile all the information, all the data, all the facts, all the interesting, fun parts of history into one single small bite, right? In the case of Genghis Khan, the solution would revolve around how exactly he came back from exile and took back his his tribe from his cousin. And later, he expanded this tribe. He made it into one of the largest empires in the world, right? In the solution, I would also talk about, say, what are the challenges he faced while doing this, how exactly he developed the mindset to do this, etc. So that's my 3 points solution to making history more accessible and more fun for the modern generation.
This is like a Gen Alpha solution to making history a lot more easier, because I know dates, names, places, situations very difficult to remember. But I think this 3-point strategy sounds like a good way to remember anything. At least you would remember, if not all 3, you would remember the solution and the problem at least, right? Like that's very interesting. And that story actually got me involved and hooked as well. COVID was a very, very important point of time in our history, I think, in this current civilization or generation. And for all of us, it's done something for us as adults. But as a child, how different was it for you? Especially because I think you discovered yourself as a historian and writer at that period. So were you too young to understand what was happening, or did you have a fair sense of what was going on?
In fact, COVID was a point in time which I feel taught a lot about me. I definitely was aware of what was going on. I, in fact, developed a slight interest in virology during that point of time. COVID, as a point in time, also had a huge impact on me and my learnings and my interest in history, right? Because that was the point in time in which I had lots of time. My school had shut down, so my online class was only going on for 3 hours. And after that 3 hours, I had the entire day to myself, right? And my aim was to do something productive, was not to just laze around in front of the computer, right? And that's how I was able to utilize my time to start studying and researching and writing history. So it's also happened to be around that time that that a publisher had been trying to sign on my father for something, and he had one day called my father up. I happened to pick up the phone, and we had a small conversation in which I happened to mention my work on history, my research, and what exactly I was writing. This piqued his interest, and he really wanted to get on a video call with me the next day so that we could speak more about what I was writing, right? On the next day, during our conversation, we spoke for about an hour, 90 minutes, in which, and after following the conversation, I was very surprised to see that he had sent me a contract to publish a book on what I was writing. And this was later taken up by the French publisher Hachette, who happened to be the second largest in the world. And they published what became my first two books, World History in 3 Points and More World History in 3 Points, right? This is a sequel to the first book.
I love it. I mean, what started out as just like a simple, time away from school, away from everything, like at home, got you to start writing. And I'm very proud of you for having done that. Your next book, however, which is called Hidden Links. I mean, there's a lot of research you did with your dad, like you said. What are some of the most surprising hidden links in history that have taken you by shock? And, I want to also ask you, what's the strangest historical fact or story that has really caught your attention?
So, in the book Hidden Links, one of the most interesting things, according to me, that we came across was a set of climate changes, right? The common misconception in modern society is that climate change is something that's just the occurrence of 50 years back. But we, while going through the data, realized that climate change is not a recent happening, but rather something that has been occurring for a few millennia, and it has been recurring throughout history with a set of patterns, right? So every time there is a climate change in history, there is a few patterns that surround it. Say, for example, each climate change occurs for just about 500 years, and in the intervals between each of the 500 years, there is a period of churn, right? For example, let us go back 2000 BCE, the start of modern civilizations. All of the great valley civilizations, river valley civilizations are popping up during this point in time, right? Whether it is the Indus Valley civilization in India, the Chinese civilization in China, the Minoan civilization in the Crete in Greece. the Sumerian civilization in Mesopotamia or modern Iraq, and the Egyptian civilization, which is flourishing in Egypt. All these civilizations peak about 2000 BCE, right? But we saw that all of these civilizations also happen to fall in the period between 1700 to 1500 BCE, right? And this piqued our thoughts, right? We started wondering, why exactly did this happen and how is it all happening at the same point in time, right? That's when we realized that it was a climate change that caused the collapse of all of these civilizations at the same time, right? In around 1500 and 1700 BCE. And it was also following this that during an interval between a climate change, a period known as the Fountainhead Epoch sparked up, which I spoke about before, right? And I feel that this is the most crazy fact I've ever discovered, right? Climate change is not a modern happening, but has rather been happening throughout history, and it is climate change that is a very factor for the fall of some of the greatest civilizations towards the beginning of time.
So, I mean, you've gone back to 2000 BC. And this happened, the fall happened in 700 to 500. So basically, wow. So that's a period that you went back to. And what was the climate change we're talking about? Like, what really happened?
So, this climate change is a large change in weather, right? And it specifically affects the grasslands of which span between Hungary to Russia, right? And these grasslands are called the steppes, right? Which have very short grasses, nothing else. Otherwise it's completely barren, right? And there are huge changes in climate which occur in this specific region, which immediately sparks people to start moving, right? And it is these migrations that might eventually have caused the fall of the civilizations.
Very interesting. So climate change is not just something that should be on Mr. Narendra Modi and Donald Trump's or whoever's the next US president's agenda, right? This has been happening for years and years and years. When you look back at history and you read about these things that possibly also are looked at today, do you sometimes feel that we as humans are just small, insignificant beings, or do you believe that everybody has a larger than life purpose in your understanding of history as it is?
Indeed, again, going back to climate change, I feel that is the best evidence that human beings as a species are probably way too overrated, right? We have, like I said, we believe that it is because of our modernization, our urbanization, that that climate change has popped up, right? That we are the ones producing greenhouse gases. But history is showing us, as we have unveiled in the book, that climate change is not caused by humans at all, right? And further, you can also see that in the intervals between climate changes, it is also recorded that other organisms are flourishing simultaneously. So I definitely believe that humans as a species are overrated.
I really like that. I mean, the thoughts of a 13-year-old match the thoughts of actually any human watching this. Sometimes we take ourselves too seriously, give ourselves too much credit, and maybe that is the problem. Yeah. Would you have liked to live in the age and the period of the dinosaurs? Like, were you fascinated? Because as a child, I was so fascinated by just that entire period. I don't know what era that is, but were you fascinated? Did you do a lot of reading?
So, the prehistoric period, that is the period before humans have started recording history, is a period that I've delved into very marginally, is what I would say. But I've always been fascinated, before I even got interested in history as a child, about what exactly these dinosaurs and the organisms that flourished before us, the reptiles, etc., have. Yeah, so it's definitely been at the back of my mind what it would be like to coexist amongst these organisms if they were still alive or if we were alive back then.
Yeah, we were not alive then, but do you think a world today with maybe dinosaurs in the future, I mean, with AI taking over, you never know what's going to exist or what's going to come back? Do you think there can be a world where large monsters like that and us as humans could coexist? Like in an imaginary world. I know this is not a historic question.
In a fictional world, why not? Definitely, but
doesn't look like it'll happen within our lifetime, but maybe some other time. When you read so much about history in general, do you also think about theories and timelines with respect to parallel universes? Do you ever think about these things too?
I mean, of course, definitely. So, in a parallel universe, there's infinite things that could happen, right? And at the back of my mind, I'm always thinking if I could rewrite history as a subject, right? In a parallel universe, how exactly would things occur, right? So I was recently thinking about, in a parallel universe, what if Alexander the Great did not die, right? So Alexander the Great was a Greek conqueror who, by the time, at the age of 32, he conquered the entire known world, right? But unfortunately, that's the same year when he died, the young age of 32, right? What if in a parallel universe he had not died, right? First of all, he had shown plans to conquer the Arabian Peninsula. And if he had conquered the Arabian Peninsula, that would also mean that he would spread Hellenistic and Greek values to the Eastern world, right? That would definitely bring about a change in our modern Eastern philosophy and literature. Further, if he also had plans of an invasion into the Iberian Peninsula. So that's Spain, Andorra, and Portugal, right? Again, that would have infused a sense of Hellenism and Greek ideas into another part of Europe, right? And lastly, it's a common pattern that after emperors were youth, right, they usually retire back to a capital and govern from there. So I would definitely have liked to see, in a parallel universe, how exactly Alexander the Great would have run economic, political affairs from a capital, right? So in a parallel universe, definitely be a wonderful thing to watch.
So whether it was Alexander the Great or some of the biggest people to have graced the surface of the earth, I love that, you've gone back and read their stories. But in terms of research, what's your process of research? Like if someone is watching this and is interested in history and they're young like you, or they're older, age doesn't matter. How do you think they start doing their research the right way?
I still remember as a 6-year-old delving into those various topics on the Mona Lisa and on the surrounding peripheral topics. I would say just pick up a book which you find is on an interesting topic and just start reading, right? History as a subject is not a subject where you consciously try to learn it, right? It's something where over time your mind and the subject just takes you over and you get immersed in it, right? So my advice is, if you wanted to start learning history, maybe you could start off by reading some of my books, specifically the first 2 ones, and then just delve into a topic.
Would you say that your books are pretty much like a simple, easy guide to start with history, like in bite-sized portions?
Precisely. In fact, that was the original idea behind the book, which I had sort of developed. But that's not the only lone intent, right? It's for absolutely anyone, whether you're someone who's very well versed in history, or whether you're someone who's trying to pick up the book and understand something, or whether you're studying for an exam, whether you're just trying to develop an interest in history. The idea I had in mind before writing it was that you just get interested in history. And yeah.
Simple. I like it. Even in the blurb, it says, get to the point, not the overload. I like that. I mean, I also think with our attention spans becoming lesser, even though, history is all about like really engrossing stories. I think to keep it simple, silly, I think it's called the KISS principle, where you keep it simple, stupid. I think that's what it is. I think you've done that. And, to anybody out there, especially even if you're like, feeling dummy about history, I think this is an easy book to kind of pick up and read. Going a little bit into Greek democracy, because I think that's an area of your interest. While we're talking about women empowerment today, this was a period when, women's freedom was undermined for almost 2,500 years. Yes. I had absolutely no clue about this. Tell us a little bit more.
I was talking about how exactly the Fountainhead epoch, the period between 300 to 600 BCE, was a period of churn in world history, right? It was, as a period, some of the greatest world developments came up during this time, whether it's philosophies, multiple subjects, morals, etc., right? Now, it was also during this period that democracy developed as a political philosophy, as a political idea, right? The idea behind democracy was to create a period in time in which it was not a tyrannical rule. You didn't have a single ruler. Rather, it was the rule of the people. You had the people who were dictating the ruler and not the opposite. But even though this sounds like an amazing idea, it came with a huge problem. And that was that women were left out of the democratic revolution. Women were not given the right to vote. And as democracy spread through Greek culture, so did this idea. In fact, it sort of propagated itself along with another idea, right? Another factor. And that was that Greeks worshipped women. One of the greatest Greek goddesses, Athena, was a goddess. She was a woman. But in spite of this, Greeks still curtailed women in democracy. And so there comes the bottom line. Worship women, but curtail them. And this also sort of spread into Roman culture, which was developing a little after this, right? Roman culture also brought about a new political philosophy, that being the Republic. Again, an idea in which society and the civilization was not to be centered around a tyrant or a ruler, but rather his people, the subjects. Again, unfortunately, women are left out. And again, the same policy is followed. Worship women, but curtail them. Even in Roman mythology, one of the greatest gods happens to be Minerva, a goddess, a woman. Now, as time passes on, both the Greek civilization and the Roman civilization happen to become the very center of our global culture. Alexander the Great spread Greek Hellenism, and along with it democracy, and along with it the curtailment of women. The same happens for Roman civilization, in which the Julio-Claudian dynasty spreads it across the world, again with the republic policies being curtail women but worship them. And as time progresses, as the Western Roman Empire turns into the Eastern Roman Empire, these values slowly start to spread to the rest of the world, whether it is to the Americas, to Africa through slavery, to the eastern part of the world. These values spread across, and that's how democracy and republic, two political philosophies that emerged, that were born out of the idea in which everyone had equal rights, in which people ruled, eventually caused women to be curtailed and eventually caused misogyny.
How do you think from that period to now, because this happened so many years ago, do you think the fight that women had um, to be equals to men was a very hard fought one? Because I like that line, like worship them but curtail them. So that is quite patriarchal, and misogyny, patriarchy clearly were born there. Which period or which civilization do you think turned that around? Or was that consistent work by women across the world?
I feel if you were to term it as a civilization or society, it would be the modern society or civilization that has brought this around. But it has definitely been the work of women over centuries. In fact, at one of the final sentences of the women empowerment chapter in our book Hidden Links, it talks about how exactly in the beginning of time, you had great women like, say for example, high priestesses, etc. And we compared them to now, in which we have Marie Curie, who was the first person to win more than 2 Nobel Prizes. We have leaders of countries who are women. And yeah, I feel it's their effort over such a long period of time where we're slowly getting out of that misogyny, getting out of that idea of worshipping but curtailing women.
I love it. I mean, so even as a historian, you think women across the ages have been fighting against misogyny, patriarchy, being burnt at the stake, and stuff like that. I mean, overall. Today, when you sit across, like, say, have you ever met a female historian, like a counterpart? Somebody in school or college who's as interested in history?
Yes.
Yeah, when you sit across them, because this is 2024, as a young boy of 13, having read all this, what do you feel when you sit across a girl or a woman and you have these conversations?
So I've visited a lot of literature festivals, and I've been amongst people who share a common interest with me, and that is history, including multiple women. And I've had this conversation about them, about how exactly I feel it has developed over a period of time, the idea of curtailing women but worshipping them. I feel that women sort of also have an idea that
they need to be putting themselves out there. I mean, you feel today a woman and man is equal? That was my question. I mean, at 13.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah?
Definitely.
You definitely feel that. So we've come a far way from back in the day. I like that. I just wanted to know, as a 13-year-old male historian, if you feel that, which is really cool. Which world leader or historical figure, I know you said Alexander the Great,
Yeah.
but apart from Alexander the Great, who's a historical figure or leader that you absolutely admire and respect?
Absolutely admire and respect. I mean, there are lots of people, again, lots of world conquerors, one being Napoleon. But I feel, as someone I really respect, it would be maybe a philosopher. I definitely look up to lots of the Hellenistic philosophers, that being Plato, Aristotle, Socrates. I look up to the way they have sort of changed our ideas on say, things as far away as ethics, even adding philosophy to science. I also look up to a lot of other people from scholarly backgrounds, including, say, more modern philosophers like Rousseau or Jean Locke, or even modern economists like, say, Daniel Kahneman or John Nash.
I love the names that you've given, and I think I've read them in my history and economic books. But is there one story, like how you talked about, Alexander the Great, a story of a historical leader that's really impressed you? Maybe it's the ethics, like you said, or it's just the way that they've conquered. Like the story has captured you, fascinated you. Who would that be?
Um, I did speak about Genghis Khan's story, and there's a very important reason for why I chose that as an example for my situation, complication, solution format, right? And that is because his story is just a beautiful visionary story, right? He comes up as a nothing but a small boy who's exiled from a small tribe, but he rises up and he takes advantage of the small things that he has in life. And yeah, what a wonderful story. He creates the largest contiguous land empire in the world.
Yeah, coming from nowhere and being a legend, that is truly inspiring. Any Indian historic figure that you are awed by? I mean, is there one you would pick?
His Indian historic figure, I mean,
And we have so many dynasties and
Yeah.
civilizations. While we're focused on world history quite a bit, I just, because we're from India, is there one Indian historical figure that could be from recent times as well?
yeah. If it's recent times, then I would say Amartya Sen, the economist. But if I was looking back in time, I would say it's between Chandragupta Maurya, who was one of the first people to start consolidating a large empire across India instead of it having small princely states. And then there's, of course, the mathematician during the Hindu Golden Age, Aryabhatta, who happened to invent the zero. Until then, it was just blank space kept by mathematicians. But he invented the numerical zeros.
Interesting. I mean, I really like it that you know Indian history as well. I was actually testing you. I was kidding. Tell us, do you think there's anything we can learn from these ancient civilizations that you read so much about? Or are modern civilizations more advanced and interesting to you?
One of my most favorite philosopher is a German philosopher. His name is Georg Hegel. Right? Hegel speaks, his revolutionary philosophy is one in which he speaks about how exactly we adapt things from the primitive or the older societies. Right? So until his time, the common misconception is that we have nothing to derive or from the past civilizations and societies, right? We as a modern world, as a modern society, are the best possible things, right? We are most advanced in terms of technology, in terms of norms, etc. Right? Hegel said that we could learn from the past. We are not a perfect society. We can adapt things. We can adopt small things from the past and add it onto our present to make our modern society and our future society the best. So I'll give you an example. In our modern world, we believe we sort of are always by ourselves, right? We're always looking at our phones, where we'd rather watch something on our phone than go out and spend time with our friends or family. But when we go back in time to the 14th century, we can learn from an Arab historian and chronicler that togetherness is one of the most important aspects of society. Ibn Khaldun terms this togetherness as asabiya. And we can also take examples of asabiya from history. Take, for example, Genghis Khan's Mongol Empire again. It was built on a nomadic foundation. It was built on the ideas of asabiya, of togetherness. Right? That's what nomadism is all about. But Ibn Khaldun says that after a powerhouse loses its asabiya, it begins its fall. And we see the exact same thing with Genghis Khan's empire. Right as as his descendants lose their nomadic origins, they start settling down, they start getting more used to earthly luxuries like, say, palaces. They lose their asabiya and the Mongol Empire completely falls. The bottom line, neither modern nor futuristic civilizations are perfect. But we can always graft things, take things, adapt things, and put them to make our present and future civilization the best possible one.
I love it. The word was asibya, right?
Yes.
Which is togetherness.
Togetherness.
And it can only exist in nomadic sort of cultures. The minute you have roots, you're lost. But we all have roots now, right?
that kind of a sense. So, nomadism is one of the ways of adopting asabiya. And that's how the Mongols did it. But you can definitely do it. Spending more time with people itself is a form of asabiya. Or going into nature and spending time with that is also another form of asabiya.
So I think people should find their asibya instead of just being fixated to their phones. And I mean, it just takes you back. I like that point. It's quite interesting. When you look at different ages, the dark ages in Europe, a lot of people talk about it. It's said to have coexisted with the golden ages in India, China, and the Middle East. Tell us about how those two came together.
So the Dark Ages is a period in history from 500 AD to 1500 AD. That's the period in time in which there is supposed to be zero intellectual or scholarly development. Absolutely nothing. The world is at a standstill. Now, probably because of the world being more Western oriented, the misconception is that the entire world is going through a dark age when the Western world is going through an intellectual and scholarly dark age. But when we were looking at all of these various events happening in silos, in hidden links, we realized that this was not the case at all. In fact, when there is a dark age going on in Europe, in the Western world, there were various golden ages occurring across the rest of the world. Take, for example, in China, there was the Chinese Golden Age under the Tang and Song empires. In this period, a lot of the greatest innovations in the world were developed, including gunpowder, woodblock printing, which is the predecessor to modern printing. There was the invention of paper, and even the invention of ice cream occurred during this point in time. Now, in the Middle East, it was a completely different situation. It was not material inventions, but rather philosophical and scholarly things that were going on there. The Arab Golden Age, which was occurring in Middle East, again at a similar time, at the same time of the Dark Ages and in Europe and the Golden Age in China. Over here, they were sort of adapting other scholarly ideas and making it more Arabic, adding an Islamic twist to it. Say, for example, one of the most well-known Arab philosophers, Al-Farabi, is known for adapting Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics and translating it to Arabic and adding Islamic values to it. Now, what is also happening during the Arab Golden Age is, say, Omar Khayyam, one of the greatest astronomers, is developing a lot of his thoughts. Al-Khwarizmi, who is the inventor of algebra, was writing his book called Algebra, on which the entire modern mathematical syllabus of algebra is completely based on his works. Simultaneously, at the same time, in India, there is the Hindu Golden Age going on, in which playwrights such as Kalidasa are emerging, or Aryabhatta, the personality I spoke about, developed the zero. And now when we go down to South India, there is the Sangam era, the South Indian Golden Age, in which literature, poetry is flourishing, or various South Indian dance forms are being developed. And that is how, during the Dark Ages in Europe, a period of absolutely an intellectual, a scholarly standstill, there is a golden age occurring in China, in which a lot of the greatest inventions are being created. There is a golden age in the Middle East, the Arab Golden Age, in which a lot of the common scholarly works are being translated and adapted for an Arabic audience. There is the Hindu Golden Age in India. And then there is finally the South Indian Golden Age of the Sangam era. The bottom line is that even amidst the darkness, the Dark Age, just find the golden light, which is the Golden Ages.
I love it. So, I mean, you could never say at any point of time in history was the world completely dark, at least as long as humans inhabited it, right? Is there some sort of metaphorical learning from that they always say that when there is darkness, you look for the light? I mean, sometimes it takes time for darkness to sort of be dispelled. But like you said, so many different civilizations are turning the wheels of time in a good way. And I myself have, because I am from the south of India, I've read about the Sangam period, and there's so much of like literature that was born out of it, which have now become films of interest. But when you read all this and then you, do you go back and sometimes watch movies or, non-fiction work on it with respect to like a visual experience? Do you do that?
Yes, I do. I'm very interested in some of the docu-series and the series and the documentaries on history. One of the first things that again engaged my interest for history alongside the Mona Lisa was a historical documentary on various museums across the world, which my father had shown me, called Museum Secrets. So that's definitely there.
That's nice. I mean, so it's always a visual treat and a literary treat to be someone who's interested in history. There's so many stories from different times and ages. But my question here is, at 13, how do you remember names, periods, dates, the associations? I know you've made it simple in your books for us, but for you, yourself, do you think you have to hone certain skills in order to be so up to date and up to speed?
Not at all. So at least for common history, you definitely do not need any skills. For our detective-based history, you do require some basic skills and tools which my father helped me develop. But to understand history, you do not require any skills at all. And to memorize dates or to remember anecdotes and periods, once you immerse yourself in the subject, it sort of comes to you. You don't need to go to it.
Wow. I mean, I wish it could happen as easily for me, but I have never seen somebody just dole out dates as easily. We had another historian who did come into the studio, and he talks a lot about Bangalore's history, which is quite interesting. You've been invited to the World Economic Forum and the ambassador at various other global forums. How excited does that make you feel, buddy?
My plan, my idea, ever since I have gotten interested in history, was always to propagate history and sort of show the rest of the world how interesting as a subject it is, how you can sort of get immersed in it and just fall in love with the subject. And being invited to forums such as the Global Shapers of the World Economic Forum, or being given the honor to be the global ambassador for Kektil, has sort of been my way of propagating my voice, of spreading my voice to the rest of the world so that people can understand how interesting history is as a subject.
Well, it definitely sounds very interesting. Every little incident that you've told me, I think I will remember it more than some of my history teachers. Because it's been very interesting the way you put it. If you had to take one period of history, and you could take an event and you could rewrite it in your own way, what would you do it as?
So, like I said in our parallel universe conversation, it would definitely be if I could rewrite Alexander the Great's career, rewrite Alexander the Great's life. I would definitely try to change a few of his conquests. Maybe if I could involve myself in a few of his military tactics, I would definitely wonder if I could change some certain things. Again, of course, I would try to rewrite his death and expand on his life. And finally, I would try to see if I could quell the rebellion amongst his soldiers. And that rebellion was the very cause of Alexander needing to reverse back and go back to Greece, and which is on the way he died. If that rebellion didn't happen, he would have continued on his conquest in India. Maybe our society would be completely different. So that is something I would rewrite.
Well, I don't know about Alexander in India, but the British in India, that period, are you a fan or are you a bigger fan of the Quit India movement?
I'm a fan of both, as in British in India has impacted us in multiple ways. It has definitely caused us to lose a large amount of our resources, but also it has integrated Western learning and Western culture into our systems, including the educational system, or the even our roads are kind of similar to what the British have developed. So.
I mean, so those are the good parts. So, is there any one particular freedom fighter in India that you're a fan of?
I'm a big fan of Tipu Sultan. I believe that it is a few of the warriors like him that, even though they seem useless in the bigger picture, and it was more recent people like, say, Gandhi, who seem to have a bigger impact. I believe that it is him who has caused a long-term, and warriors like him, who have caused a long-term effect and caused the British to leave India at a certain point in time.
That's very interesting. But if there's one civilization that existed in India across the ages, dark ages, golden ages, whatever, what civilization was the most interesting, and something about that civilization that spoke out to you?
Definitely the Indus Valley civilization. The Indus Valley civilization, what I love about it so much is that it was always ahead of its time in terms of developments, in terms of its culture, right? Say, for example, the Indus Valley civilization was one of the civilizations in which women were always respected, and in some of the in all of the Indus Valley sources, they're always depicted as happy, as dancing. Further, they were, in terms of their hygiene and cleanliness, they had very well developed sewage systems, and they were always ahead of their time. They were more modern than we are.
I really like that. And I've read that too, which is why I actually particularly asked you. I'm going to do a very quick rapid fire with you, Zac. Are you all set?
All set.
Quick questions, quick answers. Tell us the first thing that you do when you wake up every day. I am on my phone and I'm hoping you're not.
First thing I do when I wake up is I visualize the rest of my day. It's what is practiced by a lot of the great sportsmen and thinkers. I visualize the rest of my day. I see the successes. I see the failures and how I learn from those failures. I just visualize.
So what do you visualize for like a good day for a child historian?
Maybe a productive way in which I see myself studying, I see myself learning, I see myself playing with my friends and interacting.
And if there was one civilization you had to go back and, learn some more, just by yourself, reading about it, researching about it, which era would you transport yourself to?
I would go back to the very beginning of time, the time in which humans have just started to evolve. I would see during the Bronze Age, during the Iron Age. I just want to go back.
That's lovely. I mean, I wish I could see humans in our original form. I think there would have been way less greed and maybe more authenticity, I feel. Also, what's the one book of history apart from your books that you think people should read and makes for a very interesting, glimpse through the ages?
Through the ages. Um, there are a lot of interesting history books. So one which I had read recently was called The Horde, which is a book that talks in extent about the Kipchak Khanate, which is a subsidiary of the Mongols. Apart from that, there's Early Indians by Tony Joseph, which is a mix of a genetic study and a proper history book that talks about the Indus Valley civilization in India.
Lovely. Tell us one historical figure that you want to have lunch or dinner with, and what would you ask? Like one question.
My role model, and that's again, I'm saying it again, it's Alexander the Great. I would ask him maybe either it would be something about his military tactics or his flanks and how exactly I want to know how he moves his infantry. Or else I would ask on what he was thinking throughout this time, what he saw as the future for Hellenism and Greek culture.
Interesting. Your biggest guilty pleasure on a day you're not doing history?
This is my long showers. My parents have told me very well every time I enter the shower I should be out in an instant. But I always spend time. I start thinking about my school life, about history, and that's my biggest guilty pleasure.
That's nice. And when you go to school, do some of your friends look at you differently because they are still just going to school and coming back, and you have an alternative career already? Is this like a question a lot of people ask you?
Absolutely not. In school, I'm just a normal child. I think even in reality I am. But yes.
Nobody asks you like, what's your current exploits? Like, what are you reading right now? Is it Alexander? Is it, I don't know, whoever it is?
I mean, I have had some great conversations with teachers on, specifically history teachers, on what I'm reading. But no, I'm just a normal child.
I like that. If history had a soundtrack, because I love music, what would that be, according to you?
Very interesting question. Interestingly, the national anthem of the European Union happens to be the works of Beethoven. And I believe that Beethoven is a great soundtrack for history, and that's for a specific reason. It can be any of Beethoven's symphony, but you can see that it starts off in a very calm, serene manner, followed by a huge tension, right? That sort of keeps you standing, followed by another calm, serene bit of time, and again a tension, just like how history functions.
I mean, it's also how life functions, right? You have like the ups, the downs, then a quiet period. And I think after the quiet period, there's always a storm or a war, as you would see in history.
Or a climate change.
Yeah, interesting. The craziest fact from all of your history research that really stuns you, what would that be?
Again, going back to our previous conversation, it is the Fountainhead epoch. It still intrigues me now how every single norm our world follows today is derived from just a small period of 300 years, 0.1% of the time on which humans have been on the earth. How that small period of time has impacted us so greatly, and we barely even know about it.
I barely knew about it. Tell us one thing that happened in that period. You said 300 to
600 BC.
600 BC. One thing from that era which you didn't know, would never have known had happened.
Probably some of the great economic reforms. As in, until very recently, my perception of how economics as a subject function was what had come after the time of Adam Smith, the father of modern economics. But I understood various things, such as how the Lydians you started minting coins, etc., about economics from the Fountainhead epoch.
Way back in the day. When money was not even a thing.
It was some forms of coinage were there, but
okay.
Yeah, barely a thing.
Barely. Wow, interesting. Tell us which country, according to you, has the most fascinating history. I would love for you to say India, but you can say any country.
India, definitely, obviously, one of the countries with the richest history, but I believe that every culture, every country across the world has an equally beautiful culture and history. Specifically, I believe that a region, not a country, with underrated history is the steppe region, which is a region extending from Hungary to Russia. It has absolutely nothing. It's grasslands with just short grass, nothing else. But a lot of the great climate changes which have influenced the rest of our world, Genghis Khan himself originated from there, underrated history from there
That's nice. Hungary to Russia.
to Russia.
Interesting. Does Ukraine fall in that?
It does.
I won't ask you questions about that. All right. What is the one thing that people always get wrong about you? Like, I mean, what I would have got wrong from you about you was just the fact that you're 13. I would have still said there is, maybe I can't have an equal conversation, but I am so able to have an equal conversation with you.
Yeah.
I didn't think that. Do people come and tell you things about you like this every day?
Definitely. I believe that maybe something people don't really know about me is that my interest is not limited to history. It spans. I read evolutionary biology. I read behavioral economics, and I feel the way people think about when they converse with me. I feel that it's something that I should not take the credit for it, but rather history as a subject, which has completely taken me over. It's not me, but the subject who's speaking.
We should make your name Zac History Verghese. In the history of time, I think that's how your name will be rewritten. If you did not do history, what would you have done? Because you have other interests.
I would. I think I would be a storyteller, or not even a storyteller, a story interpreter. I would retell or change or modify or just interpret how exactly stories are told.
I love that. I mean, every little story you've told me has kept me hooked on, and I've had a fantastic time on this podcast. It's called the BreakFree Podcast, and we feature people of different capacities talking about different things. But today on the show, I think I have had the chance to talk to somebody who's from an extremely different world, and at such a young age, you're doing something differently. So, if you want to talk to anyone watching this at any age, to break free from the norm of what you should be or what you could be, what would your break free story be like?
If I could talk to anyone, my story would the thing I would tell them is just follow your defining moments. When I was 6 years old, my mother showed me a random picture, something that should have no consequence on the rest of my life. But that moment was my defining moment. It changed the course of my life. In the same way, you should find your defining moments. You should search for it and you should make the best of it.
And if it just happens to you and you understand, yes, like you knew you were intrigued by the Mona Lisa, so there started your journey with history. But for somebody who does not know, maybe like a Jane of all trades, because my name is Jane, how do I know this is what I should delve into? Anybody watching this or listening to this?
It's not something you know, it's something you feel. It's, in my case, like I said, the subject just took over me. You should not be searching for this kind of stuff. Instead, it should be searching for you.
Very, very wise words of wisdom from a 13-year-old. It should search for you. And I think when you sort of get lost, whether it's history or art or music or mathematics or economics or absolutely any subject of your interest, when something really intrigues you, just delve a little deeper and you shall just flourish. Yeah, that's the way everybody should break free.
Absolutely.
I believe in that. Well, thank you so much, Zac, for joining us on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure having you. I can't wait to see how your life is going to unfold. And do you have any idea of what the next 2 decades or so are going to be? for you?
I don't know. As history shows us, only time can tell.
But you're definitely going to be diving deeper into history.
Definitely.
Are we going to see some like maybe fiction based work? Like, you know, how Dan Brown combined history with controversy, with extremely different sort of like subjects that at that point when he put out the Da Vinci Code, nobody even thought about, you know, did this happen? Could this happen? And then he made a change. Do you see yourself do something like that maybe as well?
Why not? I mean, now we've combined investigating into history. Why not? But again, only time can tell.
That is a very famous Jeffrey Archer book. Only time will tell, I think. Yes, thank you so much for joining us, Zac. It's been an absolute pleasure. Like I said, can't wait for more books. I'm going to read your books. I'm going to try and see, you know, whether I can be interested in history as well, because I think history is interesting for everybody, to be honest. So I'm going to do that. You guys stay tuned for the next episode.